The morning of the state banquet had arrived with a heavy gray sky hanging over London, as if the weather itself understood the significance of the hours ahead. Inside the private apartments of Clarence House, King Charles III stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting the sash of his most formal military uniform. The man looking back at him was no longer the young Prince of Wales, the one who had waited decades for his turn, the one whose romantic life had been dissected by the world since he was a teenager. That boy seemed like a ghost now. His valet moved quietly in the background, laying out the final accessories, but Charles barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, tangled in the complex web of history and relationships that had come to define his family. Tonight, he would host the President of the United States and the First Lady. The world's media would be watching every glance, every gesture. But for Charles, the true tension was not geopolitical. It was deeply, painfully personal. He thought of his mother, the late Queen. For 70 years, she had been the pillar, the unmoving figurehead who commanded respect through her mere presence. Now that burden rested on his shoulders, and beside him, as it had been for nearly 2 decades, was Camilla, his wife, his queen consort, the woman he had loved for most of his adult life, the relationship that had caused so much pain and scandal, and yet, here they were. He felt a surge of protective love for her. She had weathered storms that would have sunk anyone else. But then, his thoughts drifted to another woman, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, his daughter-in-law. He watched her with a unique sense of paternal pride, and a feeling he hadn't anticipated when William first brought her home. Kate was the future, the one who would be queen after him. She was the bridge between his generation and the next, the steady hand guiding his grandchildren, the face of the monarchy's modern renewal. He knew the delicate balance required to honor both women, but he also knew the quiet, unspoken tension that sometimes hummed beneath the surface. Camilla, having fought for her place for so long, was fiercely protective of her role. Kate, patient and dutiful, was equally aware of the legacy she was building for her children. As he pinned a medal to his chest, Charles sighed. The work of a king was not just in state papers and privy council meetings. It was in managing the hearts of his family. Tonight, he would have to be more than a monarch. He would have to be a husband, a father, and a peacemaker. He just didn't know yet that a single unplanned gesture would force him to choose which role mattered most. The dance of protocol. The state apartments at Windsor Castle gleamed under the light of 1,000 candles, a scene of such opulent grandeur that it seemed lifted from a painting by Canaletto. Long tables draped in white damask were set with gold plate and centerpieces of hothouse flowers, their perfume heavy in the air. The guests, a glittering assembly of politicians, dignitaries, and international celebrities, murmured in anticipation, their eyes constantly drifting towards the grand doors where the royal family would soon appear. Outside the main hall, in a smaller reception room lined with portraits of monarchs past, the family was assembling, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the rustle of silk and satin gowns. Prince William, tall and imposing in his own formal wear, stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. He exchanged a brief, reassuring glance with his wife. Kate looked breathtaking. She wore a white gown, a tribute to the elegance of the late Queen, and the brand-new tiara on her head caught the light with every slight movement. It was the Strathmore Rose tiara, a piece rarely seen in public. Just a week ago, there had been a quiet but firm discussion about the jewels. Camilla, as is customary for the queen consort, had overseen the selection of which pieces would be worn. There had been a suggestion that perhaps Kate's chosen tiara was not suitable, that another simpler piece might be more appropriate. Charles, however, had stepped in. He had seen the disappointment in Kate's eyes, quickly masked. and he remembered the crucial role she had played in healing the family's wounds over the years. It had been Kate who had spent time with him, bonding over their shared love of art and architecture during the difficult years when William was distant. It was Kate who had gently encouraged her husband to reconcile with his father. And it had been Kate who had extended grace to Camilla from the very beginning, understanding that the family had to move forward. So the king had made his decision clear. Catherine would wear the tiara. It was a small victory, but in the hothouse environment of the palace, such things were noted. As Kate touched the diamonds now, she felt the weight of his support. Camilla, standing a few feet away in a stunning blue gown and the famed Queen Alexandra's kokoshnik tiara, looked every inch the sovereign's consort. She was composed, her smile practiced and perfect for the waiting photographers. But Kate noticed the way Camilla's fingers tapped once against her thigh, a telltale sign of tension she had learned to recognize over the years. The doors were thrown open. An official announced their arrival in a booming voice. King Charles entered first, leading the procession with Camilla on his arm. Behind them walked William and Kate. The room fell into a respectful hush as they processed through the crowd of assembled guests, heading towards the dais where the President and First Lady were waiting. Charles moved with a king's grace, stopping to exchange a few words with a dignitary here and acknowledging a bow there. Camilla stayed close, her role clear. They were a unit. But as they neared the head of the table, the carefully choreographed dance of the evening was about to encounter an unexpected step. The President, a man known for his booming voice and informal manner, stepped forward to greet the king, his hand extended. Charles shook it warmly. The First Lady then curtsied gracefully to Charles, who took her hand and raised her up. Protocol dictated that he would then turn to Camilla, who would greet the First Lady, while Kate and William would greet the President. But in the split second of movement, the order blurred. Kate, ever mindful of her supporting role, had stepped slightly forward to be ready to greet the First Lady after Camilla. Perhaps the First Lady's curtsy had brought her a half-step closer, and perhaps the President's movement had shifted the sight line. Whatever the cause, for a fleeting moment, Kate was positioned just ahead of Camilla. The silence that followed was not the silence of respect, but the silence of a held breath. A gesture. Misinterpreted. It happened in the space of a heartbeat, but to those watching, and later to millions watching the video online, the moment seemed to stretch into an eternity. Queen Camilla, ever aware of her position, saw the slight displacement in the order of precedence. It was her turn to greet the First Lady, not Kate's. Her reaction was instinctive, a reflex honed by years of navigating the treacherous waters of royal life. Her hand, the one not holding her clutch purse, moved. It was a small gesture, a subtle flick of her wrist and a gentle but firm motion with her fingers. That it was the kind of silent signal anyone might use to indicate "after you" or "step back." In any other context, it would have been utterly unremarkable, but this was not any other context. Kate saw the signal immediately. Her response was a masterclass in royal composure. There was no flash of anger, no embarrassed flush. Her serene smile did not falter for a single second. With a fluid, almost imperceptible movement, she glided back half a step, yielding the position to Camilla. She turned her head slightly towards William, as if sharing a quiet comment, gracefully removing herself from the center of the tableau. The moment passed. Camilla stepped forward and exchanged pleasantries with the First Lady. William shook hands with the President. The banquet continued. Wine was poured, toasts were made, speeches were delivered. But in the corners of the room, whispers began. Among the guests, the more eagle-eyed observers exchanged glances. The journalists present, trained to catch every nuance, made mental notes. The palace press corps knew they had seen something. It wasn't a scandal, not yet. It was a gesture. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. posted on social media platforms with a simple caption, "Camilla scolds Kate." The view counts soared into the millions. The comment sections became battlegrounds. Some users were outraged, calling Camilla's gesture dismissive and disrespectful to the future queen. "She thinks she's in charge, but Kate is the one they love," one comment read. Others rushed to Camilla's defense, arguing it was a simple matter of protocol. "She was just telling her the carriages are coming." "And it's a signal," another user countered, referencing a similar moment at a previous event. A few pointed out the obvious. Folks go absolutely crazy over the simplest little things these days. In a curious twist of timing, another old video clip began to circulate alongside the new one. It was from King Charles's coronation concert, months earlier. In it, a very tired Princess Charlotte, the young daughter of William and Kate, had been caught on camera. As the king and queen entered the royal box, little Charlotte had performed a beautiful curtsy for her grandfather. But in her childlike fatigue, she had turned away from Camilla as she rose, inadvertently missing the chance to curtsy to her step-grandmother. The clip showed Camilla reaching out and gently placing a hand on Charlotte's shoulder. And the little girl had looked up and smiled warmly at her. Camilla's defenders pointed to this as proof of her kindness. Her detractors, however, noted that even a child seemed to instinctively avoid her. Back in their apartment that night, William and Kate sat in the quiet of their sitting room, the curtains drawn against the world. William scrolled through his phone, his jaw tightening with every post he read. Kate sat across from him, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. "It's everywhere, Kate," William said, his voice low with suppressed anger. "They're saying she deliberately humiliated you." Kate finally looked up, her blue eyes tired. "I know. I've seen it." "We can't just let this slide," William insisted, standing up to pace the room. "This isn't the first time. The thing with the jewels last week, and now this. In front of the world." Kate was silent for a long moment. She thought of Camilla, not as the queen, but as a woman who had loved one man for most of her life and had finally, after decades of waiting, achieved the position she had always wanted. She also thought of the support Camilla had shown her at times, the shared glance of understanding during long ceremonies. She thought of the day of the late queen's funeral, how Camilla, despite her own grief, had gently signaled to her about Charlotte, a small act of grandmotherly guidance. "She wasn't trying to humiliate me, William," Kate said softly. "She was just doing what she thinks she has to do, protecting her space." William stopped pacing. "And what about your space? You're the Princess of Wales. You're the mother of the future king." Kate nodded slowly. "I know. And that's exactly why I have to be the one who doesn't react. I have to be the one who smiles and steps back. I have to be the one who keeps the peace, for George, for Charlotte, for Louis, for the crown." The king's dilemma. The morning after the banquet, the atmosphere at Buckingham Palace was thick with tension. The newspapers, both the broadsheets and the tabloids, led with the story. "Queen's rebuke to Kate," one headline questioned. "Camilla's cold shoulder," declared another, slightly less restrained. The palace press office was fielding calls from around the globe. In his private study, King Charles sat behind the massive rosewood desk that had once belonged to his grandfather, George VI. Before him were printouts of the online articles, the comments, the analysis. He had also received a detailed report from his private secretary about the fallout. This was no longer a family matter. It was an institutional crisis. The monarchy, which he was striving to make leaner and more modern, was being depicted as a nest of petty rivalries, with his wife cast as the villain and his beloved daughter-in-law as the victim. He knew the truth was far more complicated. He had known Camilla for over 50 years. He knew her gestures, her moods, her insecurities. He knew that her action, while perhaps clumsy, had not been born of malice. It was the instinct of a woman who had spent her life fighting for legitimacy, but he also knew that perception was reality, and the perception was damaging. A soft knock came at the door. It was Camilla. She entered, her face pale beneath her makeup. She looked smaller than usual, undiminished. "Charles," she began, her voice steady but quiet. "I need you to know, I wasn't trying to—" "I know what you were trying to do, my darling," Charles said, his voice weary. He gestured to the papers. "But this is the result." Camilla's chin lifted slightly. "I was following protocol. Catherine was out of line. Just for a second. I simply corrected it. And the world saw you correcting the mother of your step-grandchildren," Charles replied, not unkindly. "They saw you putting the future queen in her place." The silence in the room was profound. Camilla looked away towards the window overlooking the gray London sky. "I have spent my entire life being the villain in their story," she whispered. "I thought finally as your queen I would be respected." Charles rose from his chair and walked to her, taking her hands in his. "You are respected. By me. By those who matter. But this family, this institution, it requires constant tending. It requires grace." Later that day, Charles summoned William and Kate to a private meeting. It was a formal setting, not the cozy informality of a family chat. William's posture was rigid, his loyalty to his wife radiating from him like heat. Kate, in contrast, was calm, almost serene. The meeting was difficult. William voiced his concerns, his anger at seeing his wife subjected to public scrutiny. He spoke of the need for unity, for a clear understanding of roles. He mentioned the incident with the jewels. It was, by royal standards, a frank and heated exchange. Through it all, Kate listened. When it was her turn to speak, she did not complain. She did not demand apologies. Your Majesty," she said, addressing Charles formally, though her eyes were warm. "We are a family, and families have moments of misunderstanding. What matters is what we do next. We cannot control what the papers say. We can only control how we treat each other when the cameras are off." Her words hung in the air. Charles looked at her. This woman who had married into a family, famous for its emotional repression, who had endured the weighty Katie taunts, who had borne 3 children under the relentless gaze of the public, and who had just faced a global humiliation with the grace of a saint. In that moment, his admiration for her deepened into something more profound. William was silent, the anger slowly draining from his face as he looked at his wife, seeing her strength in a new light. Charles knew then what he had to do. He could not control Camilla, he could not control the press, but he could make a choice. He could send a message. The opportunity would come sooner than he expected, at the very next public engagement. The moment of choice. 3 days later, the royal family was scheduled to host a reception for philanthropic leaders at Buckingham Palace. It was a much smaller, more intimate event than the state banquet, held in the grand but less formal ballroom. The guest list included doctors, educators, and charity workers from across the Commonwealth. It was precisely the kind of engagement that Kate, with her focus on early childhood development, had made her own. The family gathered in the 1844 room beforehand. The atmosphere was noticeably different from the previous gathering. There was a studied politeness in the air, an unspoken truce. Camilla and Kate exchanged pleasantries about the guest list, their voices carefully neutral. William stood slightly apart, observing. Charles watched them all, his decision crystallizing in his mind. As the time arrived to greet the guests, the family formed a loose receiving line. This time, the order was unambiguous. The king and queen would stand together, receiving the most prominent guests first. Behind them, slightly to the side, stood William and Kate, ready to engage with the other attendees as they filtered through. The doors opened, and the first guests entered, their faces a mixture of awe and excitement. Charles shook hands, asked questions, and listened with the focused attention he was known for. Camilla stood beside him, her smile fixed, performing her role with practiced ease. William and Kate began their own conversations, the room soon filling with the pleasant hum of networking. Then, a moment of transition arrived. A group of young education advocates here to receive an award were introduced. They were precisely the kind of people Kate had championed for years. As they approached the receiving line, there was a natural pause. The protocol was fluid in these less formal settings. Charles turned, his eyes searching for Kate. She was a few feet away, just finishing a conversation with an elderly professor. Camilla, seeing the guests approach, took a half-step forward, preparing to greet them. It was the logical move. She was the queen, after all. But Charles did not turn to Camilla. He met Kate's eyes across the short distance and gave her a warm, encouraging smile. Then, and he extended his hand, not towards his wife, but towards his daughter-in-law. "Catherine," he said, his voice clear and kind, "come. You must meet these brilliant young people. Your work in this field is exactly what they've come to talk about." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a different kind of silence than the one that had engulfed the state banquet. That had been a silence of shock. This was a silence of profound realization. Every person in the vicinity stopped what they were doing. The young advocates froze, their eyes wide. Palace aides exchanged quick, meaningful glances. William's eyebrows shot up in surprise before a slow, proud smile spread across his face. Kate hesitated for only a fraction of a second. She glanced at Camilla, whose face had gone completely still. Then, with her characteristic grace, Kate stepped forward and placed her hand in the king's. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she said softly. For the next several minutes, Charles kept Kate by his side. He introduced her to the guests, praising her work, asking her to explain her initiatives. He publicly positioned her not as a junior member of the family, but as a central figure in the monarchy's mission, a leader in her own right. He had chosen to extend his hand to Kate, and in doing so, he had anointed her in front of the most important audience of all, the courtiers, the guests, and by extension, the world. Camilla stood to the side, speaking with other guests, her expression unreadable. But those who knew her well could see the slight tightening around her eyes, the rigid set of her shoulders. She had been, in the most public way possible, subtly and kindly, she passed over. The new order. In the days and weeks that followed, the significance of King Charles's gesture rippled through the royal household and beyond. The press, always hungry for a narrative shift, was quick to analyze it. "Charles chooses Kate," one headline proclaimed. "A king's blessing for the future queen," read another. The viral video of Camilla's gesture was now paired with the video of Charles extending his hand to Kate. The contrast was stark and, for the palace, surprisingly positive. The change was not just in the press, however. It was tangible within the family itself. At the next Privy Council meeting, Charles made a point of ensuring Kate was included in discussions about early childhood policy, a portfolio he had previously overseen personally. He began to refer to her, in private meetings with advisors, and as one of our greatest assets. For William, the shift was a profound relief. He saw his father's gesture for what it was, an acceptance of the future, a recognition that the monarchy's survival depended on the popularity and grace of his wife. The lingering resentment he had felt towards his father over the treatment of Diana over the long years of waiting began to soften. He saw a man trying to do the right thing, to put the institution above personal relationships. He saw a king. Kate, for her part, handled her new, more prominent position with the same quiet dignity she had always shown. She did not gloat. She did not change her behavior towards Camilla. If anything, She was even more careful to show respect to her mother-in-law in public, always acknowledging her, always deferring when protocol demanded. But she understood that Charles's gesture had been a gift, but also a test. It was up to her to justify his faith. The relationship between Camilla and Kate entered a new, more complex phase. The public rivalry, fed by the press, slowly receded. There were no more viral moments of tension. In their place were photographs of them together at official engagements, their body language carefully neutral, occasionally warm. It was a working relationship, forged in the crucible of public scrutiny. One quiet afternoon, several months later, Kate requested a private audience with the king. They met in his study, a room filled with books and family photographs. Kate came straight to the point. "Your Majesty," she began, "I wanted to thank you for that day, for your trust in me." Charles waved a hand. "It was simply the truth, Catherine." You are the future." "I know," Kate said gently. "But it cost you something. With the Queen." Charles was silent for a moment, looking at a photograph of Camilla on his desk. "Camilla and I have been together for a very long time. She understands duty. She understands sacrifice. She will adapt, as we all must." Kate nodded. "I will always respect her position, and I hope we can find a way forward that honors both of you." Charles looked at her, this remarkable woman who had married his son and brought such stability to his family. He thought of the little girl he had once bounced on his knee, the young woman who had patiently endured the media frenzy, the princess who had supported his wife on the balcony during Remembrance Sunday, and the future queen who now sat before him, offering peace. "You already have, Catherine," he said softly. "You already have." The room fell into a comfortable silence. Outside the window, the gardens of Buckingham Palace were beginning to show the first signs of spring. The monarchy, like the seasons, was turning. It was a cycle as old as time itself. And in the quiet understanding between the King and the Princess of Wales, there was a hope that this turn would be a gentle one, carrying the ancient institution forward into a future where duty and family might finally find their balance.